Have you ever wondered, why do people say if you've seen one person with dementia, you've seen one person with dementia? Or have you wondered why it is so frustrating when you go to the doctor and you have a concern about a person living with dementia and they tell you, well, it's just their dementia, there's nothing you can do about it? Has that ever frustrated you to the point that it frustrates me? Because as a family caregiver, getting that response from a person who is supposed to help me navigate and decrease the burden that I carry as a family caregiver has never been helpful, because it sets us up for failure. Because if the professionals can't figure out how to help me, how am I supposed to figure out how to make this easier? So I invite you to listen to today's episode 128 on how to stage dementia to immediately understand challenging behaviors so that we can make your burden easier for you. Have you recently found out someone you love has dementia? Struggling to wrap your head around how to be a Christian caregiver? Searching for answers by joining countless Facebook groups but find them toxic? Learning how to cope with dementia feels difficult, but learning a Christian caregiving worldview can be easy. Hey, brother and sister in Christ, I'm Lizette, occupational therapist, pastor's wife turned dementia coach, and a daughter of dementia. In this podcast, you will learn the truth that the way to make dementia care easy is your faith. Knowing that a loving God has decreed this hard providence in your life makes all the difference. Here you will gain skills. You will be challenged by what God says in His Word about caregiving, and you will learn exactly what dementia is and is not. Find clarity and certainty from God's Word so you have perseverance for this journey. Use science-backed solutions and biblical principles to redeem your time. Praying this blesses you as we dive into dementia from a Christian perspective. Let's glorify God despite dementia. What's up, Christian caregiver? It's Lizette, your dementia mentor, and you are listening to Dementia Caregiving for Families. It's the show where I teach Bible-believing Christians how to ease the burden of Alzheimer's and dementia care by speaking dementia and planning ahead so that you can decrease your stress and get back your time despite the dementia diagnosis. In today's episode, we are going to talk about how to stage dementia to immediately understand challenging behaviors. And I know that that is one of the things that many, many people tell me is the hardest part for them about a dementia caregiving journey, or these what the medical world and what society calls quote unquote challenging behaviors. So I thought it would be helpful for us today to talk about staging dementia, what it means, and how it impacts how we understand the things that we see people living with dementia sometimes doing. So, why do we frequently say, or why is it one of these things that is often said related to dementia? The well, if you've seen one person with dementia, you've seen one person with dementia, or the statement that is frequently made to a family member who is struggling with some sort of a change that the person living with dementia is experiencing, and the doctor or the nurse or someone says to them, well, there really isn't anything we can do about that. It's just their dementia. And I know from a practical perspective that when that is the answer that you as a family caregiver get related to what it is that you're trying to cope with on a daily basis, that that is really not helpful. It makes you feel hopeless and helpless. And you feel like, where are you going to get the answers for the specific challenge or the specific struggle that you are going through if everybody keeps telling you in the medical model or other people tell you, well, that's just dementia. That's the way it is. It's going to continue to get worse, or there's nothing you can do about it. It makes you feel like you want to stick your head in the sand and just say, oh my word, I can't do this. And I think that's part of why so many people struggle with dementia caregiving, because there's this misinformation or this whole school of thought that says dementia is not predictable. Well, I serve a God of order. I do not serve a God of chaos. And I believe firmly that dementia doesn't have to be so confusing at all. And one of my favorite passages in the Bible comes from James 1, verse 5, where it talks about, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. And on a personal note, one of the reasons that's one of my favorite verses in the Bible is because when I was 21 years old, my grandmother, who actually passed away with some form of dementia in her later years, I know that we do not need to be confused about dementia, because dementia is somewhat predictable because we serve a God of order. And the example I always use with people is, we've all seen children, and every single child is unique and different, but we all know that they're children, and we all know that they are going to grow up in a fairly predictable way. They don't go from a baby to a bird. They follow, a normal chronological growth pattern. Well, people who are living with dementia, and I actually contend that anybody who is at the end of their life with some sort of a process that we go through as we're passing away, all follow a fairly predictable process as we are getting ready to go meet our maker. And it's a hard conversation to have with people, because nobody wants to talk about the fact that we're all going to pass away. Well, unless the Lord comes, we're all going to die at some point or another. Some of us just know that we are closer to passing away than others. I'm going to be 54 at my next birthday, but I am not guaranteed that I'm going to make 54. I could walk out today and have a car accident and not make my 54th birthday. And that would be a sudden change and a sudden death. So I wouldn't necessarily go through a normal death and dying process. However, most people, if they live to be most of their life, unless they pass away suddenly in their sleep, most people will go through a very predictable way of actively dying, of dying. And the reason I bring this up is because we have made it such a taboo subject to talk about death and dying, that people don't want to talk about it related to any death or dying process. But I'll use a good friend of ours from church who passed away about 2 years ago. From her diagnosis until the time she passed away was a little over 5 weeks. And even though her process was significantly constrained into those 5 weeks, the last week of her life, very, very much looked like a person who was quickly passing away with dementia. She didn't go through the process in an extended period of time, but she followed a very predictable path of actively dying until she passed away that we don't necessarily think looks the same as a person living with dementia, right? But when we understand that we serve a God of order, we serve a God of not of confusion, that there is order to even our death and dying process, then it makes it easier for us to understand in terms of dementia. One of the episodes I plan on doing soon is going to be on the history of Alzheimer's and dementia, because I actually researched that recently and it was actually super, super interesting. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that briefly as we start this episode. So
did you know that caring for a person with dementia doesn't have to be this hard? If you are struggling and you would like to join our next free workshop, the topic of the workshop is 3 tips how to avoid challenging dementia behaviors without stress, anxiety, or burnout. I invite you to walk away with science-backed dementia caregiving skills that many professionals don't even know after attending this free workshop on Saturday. If you'd like to register, message me the word workshop on Instagram or check out the link in the show notes below.
here are 3 questions that I kind of thought about. So, why is staging of dementia important? So, as a family caregiver of a person living with dementia, why is it important to not necessarily know the name of the stage, but to know that there are different stages? Is because each stage has its unique features. Certain things are more common in one stage over another stage. So when you know what those commonalities are, it is easier for you to come up with solutions and strategies, which means each stage then have unique opportunities. So they have features, each stage has different features, and each stage has different opportunities. The second question I came up with is, when you understand each stage, you're more prepared to know how to help that person, and you're more prepared for what's next. So that's more a statement than a question. So when you understand each stage, you are more prepared how to help that person, and you're prepared for what's coming next. And now we're going to talk about the 3 different stages. So there are lots of different staging tools, and I'm not going to get in the weeds on all of those, but for today's purposes, I'm going to explain the stages of dementia into just the 3 primary stages. There's a precursor stage, which is called mild cognitive impairment, which is what my dad was diagnosed with last year. And even though we've not had an opportunity to have him retested because he canceled the appointment on me, he right now still just has that as the diagnosis. So that is technically not dementia. It is a pre-dementia stage. About 20% of people who have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment will convert over into a mild dementia every year, but not everybody who has mild cognitive dementia, mild cognitive impairment will actually convert over into a full diagnosis of dementia. So the 3 stages, an overview of the 3 stages. There's the early stage, there's the middle stage, and then there's the late stage of dementia. So I want you to picture in your mind three buckets, three separate buckets. So each one of the stages of dementia is a different bucket. So in the first bucket, we're going to talk about early stages of dementia. I want you to think about a person who has early stages of dementia as a person who can still do things alone. They are needing us to walk with them, but they can do things for themselves. They do not need me to get them dressed. They do not need me to help them make a meal. They typically are still very much able to do things by themselves. They just need some support. The support might be intermittent, the support might be daily, the support might change over time, but they are still able to do things all by themselves. They can take an activity and be able to sequence it through from beginning to end with most of the steps intact and pretty good quality still. So this might be mom who is living alone but is starting to have trouble remembering things. She might be having a harder time with things like taking her medication or cleaning the house or really seeing some of the overt things that you're noticing related to cleanliness in the house, but the house is still fairly put together, things are put away. When you come to see her, she still looks pretty good and kept together. She's changing her clothes. She might be wearing them again, but she's mostly able to keep up with the quality of the activity that she is doing. So the quality is still there. It is starting to go away, but the person will still look pretty well put together. And so that's a person who is in the early stage of dementia. They need us to walk with them. They do not need us to take things away from them. They need the support, but they are able to physically do the things that they need to do with fairly good quality. So the quality of the task is still pretty good. So the middle stage of dementia, or that middle bucket, looks a little bit different. Here in this stage, we do things with the person living with dementia. We start to have to supplement them for the quality of the activity that they need to do. We walk with them and we provide them mostly at that time. They are needing the verbal prompting, they're needing the reminders, they may be needing help with choosing the right outfits for the right season or for the right occasion. But they can still mostly do things for themselves, but the quality of what they're doing is starting to go away. These are the people who may or may not, when they go to the bathroom, flush the toilet or wash their hands afterwards, or when they're washing their hands, they just turn on the faucet and chuck their hands under the water and just kind of do that, rinsing thing and call it good, because they do not know what all the actual steps of the activity might be anymore. They may walk into the bathroom and take their toothbrush and brush their teeth without putting toothpaste on. So what they're needing is for us to come alongside them and verbally tell them step by step what to do. But they physically can still do it. They just cannot do the thinking part of it. So they need a person who is able to help them do it. So we are supplementing them for quality, but we're not physically doing it for them yet. This is the stage where people truly are starting to struggle more with some of the self-care types of activities, where they're truly starting to struggle to know how to do things in the right order. but they can if you just give them the right cues. Most of the time, a person who is in this middle bucket where the quality has started to go away and where they are not able to do the step by step, they are not likely safe to be living alone anymore and need supervision most of the time, or they need round the clock care. And so that's kind of that middle stage of dementia. And then the third stage or the third bucket is what we call the late stages of dementia. And in this bucket, the person who we are helping is requiring us to physically help them do the activity, either because they are not able to sequence the activity through themselves or they're not understanding what we're asking them to do. They may have trouble with their language, or they may have some physical inability to do certain types of things. But these are the people where we are physically starting to have to help and do all of the activities for them, not with them anymore, but actually for them. These are the people who we are having to help with hygiene after they've gone to the bathroom, because they may swipe, but they may not actually wipe, and they may not actually get clean. So we have a lot more hands-on physical actions that we are taking to help that person. And these are the people that we are doing for. And a person who is in their late stage of dementia is 100% requiring round the clock care. They cannot be home alone. They need somebody to be with them, and they are not safe to be left even for an hour to go run an errand. So those are the three different buckets: the early stage, the middle stage, and the late stage of dementia. So, what are some common challenges at each one of these stages? So, I thought we'd kind of talk about that just for a couple of minutes to maybe make it a little bit more tangible for you in your mind. But in the first bucket, in the mild stage, remember, this is where a person can still do everything for themselves. They just need us to be available. We are not doing things for them, but we're kind of letting them do for themselves, but we're there. They are still doing it with good quality or fair quality. They can still sequence themselves all the way through an activity, a routine and familiar activity. So what does this look like? In this stage, people are starting to lose their autonomy, but they may not see that they're struggling. They may not see that they're having difficulty with certain things. In this stage, oftentimes in this mild to middle stage, is when a person living with dementia might be very argumentative with you because they do not notice the changes that they have. If you haven't listened to last episode, episode 127, I would recommend that you listen to that one, because in that particular episode, we talked about anosognosia, which is the inability for a person to see that they have dementia. And that episode is called "Why is it important to tell people someone has dementia?" That was just this week's episode 127. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, go check it out, because we talk about anosognosia there. But the kinds of challenges that people have at this particular point in this mild dementia bucket are things like the higher level skills, things like not being able to drive anymore, or starting to struggle with bill paying, or starting to really struggle with managing their own medication, or forgetting to take their medications. They may be argumentative a little bit more, or there are other challenges that they might be exhibiting. But a lot of the kinds of challenges that people have, they're still able to be alone, but things are starting to change. I have a client right now who is helping his grandmother, who I believe is still kind of in her middle mild stages of dementia, because when we speak about what she looks like, she's still pretty well put together, but she is starting to have some changes. Almost any person can have any change at any specific time, but a lot of times what we do notice here might be things like starting to be a little bit more anxious or a little bit more afraid of being alone, or looking like they might be a little paranoid because things are not making sense to their brain. A person might be uh, having some delusional thinking. For example, somebody's coming in and stealing things because I don't remember where I put them, or my husband or my wife is having an affair. So some of those are some of the challenges that we might or typically see in those earlier stages of dementia. That is not to say that any of these cannot be seen at a different stage. I was just trying to come up with a concrete way for you to be able to kind of start to get a picture of what a mild dementia stage looks like. So just recall that this person still has pretty good quality and can do things by themselves. They're not necessarily requiring round the clock care, but they're requiring intermittent and uh, relatively consistent interaction with them to ensure that they are truly still safe to be by themselves. So, in that middle bucket, in that middle stage of dementia, what type of things do we see in this particular stage? Oftentimes, the person does not have an awareness that they are changing. And oftentimes, in this middle bucket, this bucket where we have to start to walk alongside and do a little bit more, we do with them. We do not take it away from them, but we're starting to do with the person because they're not able to do it without the verbal prompting, without somebody helping them sequence through it. But in this stage, frequently what we will see is a lot of the self-care stuff starting to fall apart, where the person might be having a harder time showering, or being reluctant to shower, or they might be a little bit more anxious. Something I frequently see at this middle stage is this is where a person starts to maybe do some hoarding of items. And there is a difference between hoarding and clutter. We're not going to get into that today. But frequently, this is the person who will have piles of things laid out in their house, because if I don't see it, I don't know where it is. So the house starts to change. There are bills laying around. There may be piles of things all throughout the house that look the same. I've been in people's houses where legitimately in every single room there was a toothpaste and toothbrush, because I believe that when she saw the toothbrush and toothpaste, that prompted her to go brush her teeth. So she didn't remember that it was in the bathroom. And so it was all over the house. There was legitimately toothbrush and toothpaste in every single room of the house. Those can be some early signs of middle stage dementia. Some anxiety might start to be creeping in, or a person might be a little bit more argumentative or angry. They may be starting to have what's called distressing beliefs. Maybe they are starting to hallucinate, or they're really truly starting to have delusions all the time, or lots of these other types of challenges that we start to see in this middle stage. Not every person will have every different type of what's called challenging behavior. And they're very specific to an individual, but they do follow patterns. So it's not like you're on your own. You just need to learn how to speak dementia, and you need to learn a repeatable framework for you to run through so that you know how to help that person as well as help yourself. Now, in the later stages of dementia, that third little bucket, This is where the person is needing round the clock care. We're starting to really need round the clock care in the middle stages too, but definitely in the late stages, a person is not safe to be home alone without round the clock care. And in this later stage of dementia, this is where we are helping do with a person and for a person. And so some of the types of things that we see at this stage are things like a person wandering through the house, or they may be hallucinating. And an interesting fact is people who have Alzheimer's dementia typically will hallucinate children for some reason. And so they may have hallucinations, or they may continue to have some delusions, or they're starting to struggle to eat. Either they're not eating at all, or they're not eating well and they're starting to lose some weight, or they may have some aggression, or they may have a lot of anxiety or sundowning, or some of these other kinds of things that come along with a later stage dementia. They might be resistant to you helping change them or going to the bathroom, or maybe they get super angry when you're trying to help them. Or they might be a person who starts to do types of things that you've never seen them do before that we call inappropriate, like inappropriate behavior of whatever way. For example, cussing or disrobing or other types of things that they normally would not have been doing. So I hope today's episode was a little bit helpful to you related to looking at how to stage dementia. So immediately you can understand some of these behaviors because they do follow a very set type of a pattern as a person is progressing through their dementia journey. And knowing this and understanding these stages of dementia will actually help you prepare. Because this is something that's one of my pet peeves is that we, being healthcare, I don't work as a therapist anymore, but in the healthcare environment, it is not often said specifically out loud that now that a person that you're helping has dementia, that ultimately, if they live long enough, they will require round the clock care. So we've got to start to prepare for that. We've got to start to plan for it. It allows us as family caregivers to do what I call affectionately the ostrich maneuver, where we stick our head in the sand and just hope that it'll go away. The reality of the matter is, if the person that you love has dementia for long enough, they will require 24-hour care. Not every person living with dementia gets to that stage of requiring 24-hour care because they might pass away before that happens because of another reason. But the fact of the matter is that we do need to prepare for that, even if it never happens. And when we are the family or the caregivers that don't want to have these open conversations with ourselves early on, we set ourselves up for failure. I have used this analogy in other episodes about the frog in cold water and caregiving. When we start down a dementia journey, we're the frog in the cold water, that the water's been turned up and is starting to warm up. And because it is so slow and insidious, and we don't notice these changes, that by the time we wake up, we're the boiled frog. Whereas if we are thrown into a crisis situation, we know that it's unpleasant and we try to get ourselves out of it. So I want to encourage you today to understand that these different stages, and understanding these different stages set you as a family caregiver up for success when you know and understand and can anticipate what's coming, because then we can prepare for it, dear sister and brother in Christ. we can prepare for it. So I hope this episode was encouraging to you. It is meant to be encouraging. And if you haven't yet attended my monthly free workshop, I do it once a month. It is tomorrow, June the 8th at 10 a.m. Eastern. And the link is in the show notes for you to sign up for this next free workshop. So I do hope you join me, because it's actually going to be about challenging behaviors and what we can do to help mitigate the responses we get from the person that we are helping. So go ahead and sign up. It's a short 2-hour workshop. If you sign up for the workshop, you will get the replay. But I invite you and encourage you to come. It's typically a small workshop where there are not a lot of people, and I will answer your questions live. So I hope to see you there tomorrow. And yet again, thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you soon, and may the Lord bless you. Thanks for joining me today, Success Seeker. I pour my heart and soul into this program to serve you. You can serve me by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and join our free Facebook group, Dementia Caregiving for Families. It's a positive and proactive space to navigate dementia caregiving together. Get practical tools and find support, but without the verbal vomit. Be a part of our community where we seek to find peace of mind and ease despite a dementia diagnosis. So join today, and see you next time as our flight takes off.